Then please, can we give a huge bar welcome to the wonderful Matt Homewood.
Hello. Oh, it's good to be back. It's been at least 7 weeks since I last spoke here. Drunken Edwardians in Lewes. Yes, Lewes being the county town of Sussex. So Lewes was famous for having 7 churches, 7 breweries and 70 pubs. It actually had 65 at its peak, and that peak was during the Edwardian period, which for those of you 1901 to 1910. So there were various pubs. We had the White Lion there, beautiful old pub, long gone. Nice picture of the fountain there in South Street. The Sussex Arms in Fisher Street. Now, this woman might look incredibly tall. You'd think initially, oh, she's standing on the back step, but she's not, as you can see. She's not incredibly tall. This chap's incredibly short. You can tell that because he's got those sort of trousers. They only made trousers in one size in those days, so that could fit a 6'8" man, or Billy Hathaway here, who was a jockey in his younger days and turned to working as a publican, and that's one of his daughters behind him. And yes, here's Eli Daw with a couple of henchmen. Massive feet causing shadow, but there you go. That's outside the Morning Star, another pub that's long gone. And here's another chap here. Basically, by the 1930s, all Lewes landlords were fat bastards with waistcoats. Anyway, so in 1907, in the middle of the Edwardian period, they closed 12 pubs in Lewes because there was just too many. There was a huge amount of drunkenness from both men and women, as you will later see, and there were just too many pubs. And they got maps out, and they were like, there's 4 here. Let's take the middle one out. So 12 pubs went in Lewes, leaving only 56. At the height, there was a pub, put it in perspective, because, of course, the population of Lewes was a lot less than it is now. And there was a pub for every 166 people in 1907. Now there's a pub for, well, there's more than 1,000 people per pub in Lewes. So you can realise how busy it was pub-wise. So I'm going to take you right back for a bit, and then we're going to gradually ease our way into the Edwardian period, where it all kicks off. So, Herr Barnard Abraham and his dog of knowledge. Now, in Lewes, this is back in the 1700s, pubs, hotels, the Crown, the White Hart, the Bear Hotel, they would get all these sort of travelling sideshows, I suppose. And Herr Barnard Abraham was one such chap, and his dog. The dog could count, and it could also tell you what the weather was going to be. Yep. A learned horse from Corland also visited Lewes and went round the pubs. And the horse would play cards with the locals and drink the beer. And my favourite, Mr. Wildburn, the bee charmer, he used to basically go into the pubs, and the bees that were trained, and they could form different shapes around him. So you can imagine that working now. You're popping into the Brewer's Arms in Lewes, and you say to the landlord, look, I've got some bees in the van. Can I bring them in and entertain the public? Now, one of the greatest sort of historical notes, really, for drunken behaviour is actually in the diary of Thomas Turner. So he was an 18th century shopkeeper in East Hoathly, very well respected. He could read and write, so when people needed letters written or even read, they would go to Thomas. He's constantly moaning in the diary that they never pay for the paper he has to write their letters on. But anyway, he spent a lot of his time wandering about, getting a bit drunk. He used to sort of do business in Lewes, and he'd walk there or get a horse if he was lucky, and get him for breakfast, sort of have too much to drink, and then spend the rest of the day trying to get home. So I'm going to show a few clippings here. Now, throughout this talk, I'm going to show you a lot of newspaper clippings, and I know the temptation is just to read them all, but I'll point out the interesting bits. So here we have We smoked a pipe or two and then went down to Mr. Jones's, where we drank 1 bowl of punch and 2 mugs of bamboo, which is basically rum with sugar in it. And yes, he came home again in liquor. So we're talking about sort of the 1750s and 1760s, just a rural shopkeeper here. And he said, never got a bet, but got very drunk. Lay at my uncle Hill's all night. I find 1 glass of liquor disorders me so much, I must and will, and I'm determined to leave off drinking anything strong. How many times have we said that? And yet again, as another one, came home after about 11:15 after staying at Mr. Porter's wood for nearly an hour and a half because his legs were rendered useless. So he sort of on the way home says, there's a wood there, I'll go and lay down. Well, he still didn't learn. This is the local shopkeeper, the guy they respect in the village, you know. Basically, this chap, Thomas and his friend, got lost in the Broil. So the Broil, which is actually where I grew up, it's on the outskirts of Ringmer, and in those days it was a massive sort of fenced-in area. And he and his friend are lost in there. And it's great because actually standing in the middle of this park, just arguing about which way is the way out. Anyway, they finally found, they got to Will Dicker's place, as you can see here, and they found Dr. Stone and Richard Savage, both very drunk. So even the doctor was really drunk at this place. And not only that, but then the doctor started a fight with Thomas. I cannot recall on what, you know, but there we go. So he ended up leaving because he didn't fancy having a fight with the doctor. The doctor and the shopkeeper having a bit of a punch-up. And so he came away and he walked the Broil until 5 a.m. When he finally got out of it and found Thomas Cushman's place and lay on his bed until about 10:25. So that's the sort of thing you're up against in those days. But the thing is, that wasn't much of a bother. If you weren't bothering the public, you weren't making a scene, that was okay. But one thing you shouldn't be doing is doing that on a Sunday morning, because you should be in church. Now, back in 1815, George Wyatt was in the Lewes Arms, and they could see him through the window. What you'd normally have on a Sunday morning is, if you're a pub and you're opening and you shouldn't, you'd have a lookout boy that look out for the town constable who would be doing his rounds to make sure no one's in the pubs. It didn't happen here at the Lewes Arms, and they saw George through the window. Maybe that... Oh, how do I go back? Maybe that one there they saw him in. And they went in, they arrested him, took him out. There was a bit of a struggle. George fell over, smacked his head on the pavement. So there's a clipping here. And they sent for Dr. Moore, who examined the wound and prescribed for him. He was taken back into the Lewes Arms house, and we left him there and pursued our regular perambulations after giving Norman, the landlord, a severe reprimand. So poor George was back where he was, probably with his pint, except he had a head wound now. Yes. So there's lots of stories of drunkenness as we go on. In 1842, you could come across as Anne Ansell, better known as the Dark Angel. And she was in the White Lion Inn, behaving herself in a very indecent manner and using the most gross and obscene language. You don't really get trouble in Lewes. I haven't seen much for years and years, but back in the sort of early 90s, mid-90s, you'd get scuffles from the people coming out of the Rainbow and the people coming out of the kebab shop. I'd rather come across them than come across the Dark Angel in a dark alley. Margaret Kenny, 1878, extraordinary conduct. So she was in the Britannia Inn, and that sort of acted, it was also a hotel as well as a pub, and she refused to go to bed, and she was really annoying everyone else who was trying to get some kip, so they arrested her. And what she did, she stripped basically in the cell and refused to put her clothes back on. And you can see here she was given a rug to make herself warm. And when taken before the magistrate, she literally had nothing on except the rug. So she refused. And she was eventually put in a wagonette with the rug thrown over her. She refused to get dressed even for prison. There you go. So, Yeah. So we're going to take you now into this is the prequel, as it were. Now we're in the Edwardian period, where it all really kicks off. And what happened in the newspapers, you'd have the court reports. So these are what's happened, who's been up in court, what their crime was, and what their fine was. And they were usually just small snippets, because quite a lot of people going in for petty crimes. And for some reason, 1903, 1904, beginning of the Edwardian period, we get more and more people being accused and fined for drunken behaviour. So this is just from 1904, and there were 3 here. We've got William James Walters in Morling Street, and he's basically staggering all over the road. We've got Arthur Piper of Keir Street, staggering. Staggering was quite common in the... we don't do it so much now, do we? But definitely did in the Edwardian period, using bad language. You can see they're fined for 5 shillings. And John Geever as well, who was found in a helpless state lying on the pavement. One of my favourites, again, 1904, good year for drinking, or bad year, I don't know what we call it. But Sidney Page, who was so drunk, he was leaning over a wall and trying to sing a song. That drunk, couldn't get the tune out. But it wasn't just the men. Oh, no, there was just as many women getting drunk as there were men. And here we can see again, 1904, and there's 3 in a row, a bad start. Winnie Gates, 15, being drunk in Westgate Street. And she was in a very drunk condition. One of the girls ran away. Her father picked her up and took her indoors. A bad start. I did research Winnie Gates, and she actually eventually got married and lived a nice long life with plenty of kids, so she was okay. Ellen Brown, a stranger. She was in Lewes High Street. Basically, she was going around kicking men. That was her Saturday afternoon sorted. And more Bennett of Brighton with P.C. Denman. Yeah, way indeed. Yes, so he tried to carry her home, and she staggered a bit, again staggering, very bad character. So this was just 1 week's newspaper report. Helen Finn, no fixed abode. So she was drunk, dancing and shouting, causing a crowd to assemble. Now, quite often, this is how you knew there was a drunk, because crowds would assemble. So police would be notified, look, there's a fight going on, there's someone drunk. And so he'd go out to that road and just look for the arc of people. Men, women and children would just crowd round, you see. And Christmas Eve, 1908, we'll find out in a minute. P.C. Edwards was called to a fight and in Southover Road. And he found a woman on the ground, and another woman above her about to kick her. And the woman on the ground was called Fanny Farley, and the woman about to kick her was also Fanny Farley. They were mother and daughter having a good old scrap. Here we go, 1905. There we go, look. There we go. New Year's Eve, 1905. See, no EastEnders special in those days, you see. So they had to make their own sort of vile entertainment. As you can see here, P.C. Edwards turned up, and one of the women is helpless drunk, and they took one of the women away. As you can see, Sergeant Upton and 3 bystanders carried her home. That's 4 men to carry this woman home. Incredible. And while they were gone, the defendant's daughter, taking her home, the defendant, the mother, used filthy language. So... yeah, again, the police are up against a lot of disorder in Lewes at that time. William Pierce is another example, because it wasn't just... we've seen a lot of the violence coming from the women, but of course the men were. I know this is pre-Edwardian, but it's just a good example, actually. So he was in Sun Street, William Pierce, this labourer, very drunk, making use of banned language. And he was asked to go indoors by P.C. Upton, but he didn't. He'd gone up, stripped to his shirt, rolled his sleeves up, and challenged anyone in the street for a fight. Witness asked him to be quiet. He refused, was very abusive, and put his fists in witness's face. But eventually the defendant's mother fetched him inside. We have a lot of this. You see, the women tended to go in for a scrap. The men were all bravado, and rolling up their shirt sleeves, but when it came to an actual fight, they tended to run away. Now, you can see here that the defendant said he was not drunk and the policeman was a storyteller. Of course, no breathalyzers or anything like that. It's very difficult to tell if someone was actually drunk or have just had half a pint, And there are many, many excuses people use to say, look, I wasn't actually drunk. Not drunk, but excited. That was one. Prisoner pleaded that some soldiers had given her 3 glasses of beer. She was not drunk, only weak. Yes. There are a lot of weak women along the riverbanks after being abused by the soldiers. Prisoner pleaded he could not stand much drink as he'd once had sunstroke. That's a good one. And of course, not drunk, but beery. I don't know what the difference is, but honestly, officer, I'm just beery. The big worry, of course, that, they were worried about bringing young children in and turning into Tonys. Because here's Tony, the child drunkard. It's got so bad that even the children are now drinking, you see. Tony's quite happy. He's 5 years old, he's got a day off school. He's got his bottle of beer and a mug. He doesn't know what all the fuss is about. But, yes, a big fear of Tonys taking over the towns. Actually, very well done by these 2 ladies here. Great example. They saw 113 Tonys leaving one public house and walking down the street sipping their beer as they went along. They must have sat out there for ages with a little clicker or something. Well, there you go. Well, also in the Edwardian period, there was a national drive, basically, to try and curtail drunkenness in general. And here's a wonderful picture here. This is the Lewes Workhouse. It was built in 1868 and finally demolished in the 50s. But it ceased to become a workhouse in 1902 and became the reformatory for inebriated women. And it was the one for the whole of the southern counties, and they decided to put it in Lewes. Here's pictures, very difficult to get these pictures, but a picture of some of the women in here. And they would go for 1, 3, or 5 years. This is for people who are habitually drunkards. And they would be reformed by religion, exercise, work, diet, and something else. And, routine, that's the one. But, of course, many of them would make daring escape attempts. And we've got one here. The inebriates escape. Yeah, slipping away during morning exercise. The women succeeded getting over the boundary, made off towards the downs. The irony is they probably did more exercise than the people they left behind in the yard, And an exciting chase followed, and they eventually captured near the chalk pit at Offham. Yes, I know, yeah. Usually when they escaped, they would just go to the nearest pub and take them out again, but, So, it's been very interesting looking at all these men and women getting drunk, and who'd have thought it? Edwardian Lewes, you'd think it's nice and quaint, but you wouldn't want to hang about after closing time, really. But I'm going to leave you with one of my favourite of all the Lewes Edwardian drunkards, and that's Fanny Trickle. You can't laugh at that bit because that's just her name. That's not her fault. She couldn't help that. It's who you marry. I did research her. Her maiden name was Fanny Beard. Beard's was a brewery in Lewes. It's a normal Lewes name. And she married William Trickle, who was a labourer in the town. So, yes. So Fanny Trickle is on Castle Banks, and poor old P.C. Upton, he gets a lot of this. He actually went to see her. And you can see she was creating a great disturbance, shouting and squealing and struggling with the men who were trying to get her home. He advised her repeatedly to go home with her friends, but she refused, and he eventually took her home himself. I presume not to his house, but to her house. He would say, "Oh, sorry, love, I bought Fanny Trickle back to me again." Defendant said a woman gave her a smack in the mouth and she returned it. Fair enough. And to top it all, of course, she denied she was drunk. There you go. Fine of £10. Thanks very much.
Matt Homewood, everyone.